Okay, so this video is about sex-linked traits. Sex-linked traits are carried on the X chromosome, and we'll be talking about why males express them more if they're recessive. And a lot of sex-linked traits that we're going to be talking about are sex-linked recessive. So traits found on the Y chromosome, like hair growing out of your ears when you're an old man, are sex-limited, which means they're found only in males. And they're not interesting to do Punnett squares for, because if the father has them, all of his sons will have them and none of his daughters will have them. So there's really not much to do for, Punnett square wise for prediction. But sex-linked traits are really, really rather interesting because even though females have two X chromosomes, most of them are recessive because they're, mutations, and then the males get them more often even though they have only one X chromosome, and we'll show you why in a minute. But Thomas Hunt Morgan had noticed when he was doing his early genetics research that fruit flies with white eyes were more often male than female, and he later figured out why. So first of all, let's talk about sex chromosomes in general. If you have two X chromosomes, you're female, and if you have an X and a Y, you're male. And that's actually also true for fruit flies. It's one thing that we have in common. So you notice that if we have a red heterozygous female, that we write X big E, X little e, because we put them on the X chromosome. A red-eyed male would be X big E, Y. Notice there's no gene for eye color on the Y chromosome. Remember that the X and Y are not truly homologous chromosomes. Be really careful, because I've seen lots of students do the crosses and put an E as a superscript on the Y chromosome, and there never will be one. I've also seen lots of students try and cross two female fruit flies. So if you have a red-eyed heterozygous female, half of her gametes will have the dominant allele and the other half will have the recessive white-eyed allele. With the male, half of his gametes will have the dominant red-eyed allele, and the other half will have the Y. So, you put the male's gametes across the top. The first thing I do is write the Y, just to remind myself not to try and cross two females. And you put the two X chromosomes from the female parent down the side, and when we combine them in the Punnett square, we get 4 different genotypes. We get 2 red-eyed females, because both of these females would be red-eyed. Phenotypically, they're the same. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference by looking at them. You have 1 red-eyed male, the X big EY, and 1 white-eyed male. For this particular cross, if you have a red-eyed male, you cannot get a red-eyed female in his offspring. So all of the offspring's females would be 100% red-eyed. And the males, you'd have a 50% red-eyed and 50% white-eyed. So be really careful, because when you're doing one of these problems, we may ask you, what are the chances of getting a white-eyed male? And that would be 1 out of 4, because if you look at the Punnett square, some of them could be female, some of them could be male, and of the males, half of them are white-eyed. That's a different question than if we ask what percentage of the males will be white-eyed, and then that answer is 50%. So just be really careful when doing these problems. So now let's cross a red-eyed heterozygous female with a white-eyed male. And when you distribute the alleles to the gametes, half of the female's gametes would have the dominant allele and the other half would have the recessive. With the male's gametes, you'd have a recessive allele and then the Y. So when we fill out our Punnett square, we get 1 red-eyed female, 1 white-eyed female, 1 red-eyed male, and 1 white-eyed male. So the females, we have a 1-to-1 red to white ratio, and with the males, we also have a 1-to-1 red to white ratio. Some people think females can't get sex-linked traits. They can, they just have to inherit them from their father and their mother. And so they have to get 2 alleles that are recessive in order to get the sex-linked recessive trait. That's why more males have sex-linked recessive traits, because they can get it from they always get it from their mother, but there's 2 alleles that the mother can pass on. So if a female is going to get a sex-linked trait, It has to be from both parents. If a male gets a sex-linked trait, he inherits it from his mother. So why are most sex-linked traits expressed by males but carried by females? Well, in order for a female to have a sex-linked recessive trait, she has to have 2 X chromosomes with recessive alleles. Males only need to have 1 X chromosome with a recessive allele to have the trait, because their other chromosome is a Y chromosome. Can a male be a carrier of a sex-linked trait? The answer to that is no. A carrier is someone who has the gene and does not express the trait. So because males only have 1 X chromosome, if they have that gene, they express that trait. So the females are considered carriers if they can pass it on but don't have it themselves. Now, that being said, be careful, because this female has white eyes, but she would not be considered a carrier. This female has red eyes, but is heterozygous and can pass down the allele, and she would be considered a carrier. Males, have it or they don't. Now, can a male be a carrier of a non-sex-linked trait like an autosomal trait? And by the way, autosomal traits are any traits that are not carried on the X or Y chromosome. And absolutely, a male can be a carrier if they are heterozygous and it's a recessive trait. You're not technically considered a carrier of a dominant gene because you would express it if it's dominant. So you are a carrier of a gene or a trait if you can pass it down but don't express it yourself. So males and females can be a carrier of an autosomal recessive trait, but only females can be a carrier of sex-linked recessive traits.